Well, thank you for joining us today for this edition of Momentum, brought to you by the Bagley College of Engineering. I'm your host, James Warnock, and joining me today is Dr. Bill Elmore. Dr. Elmore is the director of the Dave C. Swalm School of Chemical Engineering here at Mississippi State. Thanks for joining us today, Bill.
Thank you, James.
Now, I know from talking to you that you don't necessarily come from a family of engineers necessarily. You come from a family of musicians. So just tell me, how did you end up becoming a chemical engineering, getting interested in this field, and ending up here at Mississippi State?
Well, I tell my students all the time, and prospective students, about that sort of wandering that we can do in our early years of college. I started out, I tell students, I was actually a music major for about a week or two. I started school and...
A whole week or two?
Yeah, well, I had studied classical music for 10 years through my elementary and high school years, and had thought to pursue that and realized pretty quickly that I didn't feel like that was, if you want to call it a calling or something that was that interesting to me. So quickly changed, and through some of my peers decided to go into the biological sciences, which led to some research interest and ultimately to chemical engineering. It was a sort of a long path, because I finished in the early 80s, and during that time period oil and gas markets were down a little bit, so a lot of us rethought our career paths and actually chose graduate school. In fact, several of my peers here at Mississippi State were all virtually the same age, graduated about the same time in sort of a down market. And through that love for research, through some co-op experiences that I really emphasized to students, that led me to stay in chemical engineering and pursue it all the way through to a PhD. I finished in 1990 and taught for 15 years at Louisiana Tech, and then through some interesting circumstances found out about a teaching chair, the Hunter Henry Chair, here at Mississippi State. Very excited about that, so I applied and came here in 2005 in the Hunter Henry Chair. Have proceeded through that sort of for the last, now I'm in my 12th year here, and absolutely love it. Maroon and white all the way.
Great, that's always good to hear. Now, in the time that you've been here, we've seen some incredible growth in the School of Chemical Engineering.
Absolutely.
Student numbers have been going up. The quality of the students is outstanding. A lot of students in the Honors College as well, which is always a great thing. What is it that you say to these high school students when they come to visit campus to really attract them to chemical engineering and petroleum engineering as well?
Well, yes, as we started our petroleum program back in the fall of 2015, and so I'm excited about that. And so when I talk to prospective students, I first start with the idea of engineering in general. I want them to think about, if you like to take your math and science interest and shape it into a job that gives you a lot of variety. That's one of the primary selling points I try to make to students when I begin that conversation with prospective students, and I do try to meet with each one that comes in the door. And so to emphasize to them that the job itself can have all sorts of variety, that if it's your preference with a bachelor's degree, you could indeed be in a full dress suit, downtown Houston, working deals and with your company and with all sorts of interactions. You could be in the hard hat and the steel-toed boots if you want to be out in the plant managing and running things. I try to emphasize too that engineering leads to the opportunities to manage data and people, to work with a lot of variety on the day-to-day job. That sells pretty well with students. They tend to think that I like things. I like a lot of variety of things, and so using math and science and their aptitude in those areas then sort of gets them in the door to our College of Engineering. And from that, then I will start to shift towards the emphasis on the chemical companies, pulp and paper, and oil and gas industries, and talk about some of the particulars of those things, which often it's those students who have enjoyed high school chemistry. And I do try to draw that distinction between what our chemists study and do for career paths and what the chemical engineers and petroleum engineers do. Again, just talking a little bit about the variety of day-to-day tasks. And that has, over the years, been a pretty attractive thing to most of the students that I talk to.
You mentioned the introduction of the petroleum engineering program back in fall of 2015. And I know that was a program we had here several years ago when we brought it back to the layperson. How do you describe the difference between petroleum engineering and chemical engineering?
Well, and actually having some of my own children that are engineers and out in industry, I've been able to learn just through their experiences and through, of course, over the years. In fact, my own career path almost started down the path of the drilling side, the upstream side, finishing wells and that sort of thing. So chemical and petroleum engineers can go out there in oil and gas and work in what's called upstream, which is effectively discovering, identifying reservoirs, developing those reservoirs, bringing that oil to the refinery. So getting it into the pipeline, that's primarily what petroleum engineers do. There are emphases in petroleum engineering on what's called reservoir engineering. So again, scoping out what's underground, what's available, to the extent to which it's available, and how it might be recovered. Drilling, that's a specialization within petroleum engineering, and then looking at production. Again, our emphasis in our program is on reservoir engineering. So we try to, we've recruited faculty in those areas for their research and for that emphasis in instruction at the bachelor's level. Once it's in the pipeline, then it's generally shifted towards the emphasis of chemical engineers, that bringing it into the refinery and converting it to all the products that are sent, and that's called downstream. So that's the distinction that I try to help with students.
Right.
One really interesting feature of our program here is that for the first 2 years, the course sequence is virtually identical. So what that allows students to do is to, if they want to, I sell it to them like fishing. Hey, you fish on both sides of the boat. If you want to stay a double major in petroleum and chemical engineering, which a number are choosing, you can follow that path and decide as you see the opportunities develop and your interests develop. And that's become very attractive to prospective students.
I can imagine so. Well, Bill, thanks for joining us today. We're going to take a quick break now, and we'll be back with our next guest after these messages.